Hey, Eagles fans, this is Chris Franklin from NJ Advanced Media, and welcome to the No-Huddle Show podcast, the show where we discuss all things related to the Philadelphia Eagles. Before we begin, I want to remind you that you can read our content on NJ.com/Eagles and make sure to bookmark that to get the latest Eagles news and analysis. Today, I'm once again joined by my No-Huddle Show co-hosts Bob Brookover and Cayden Steele. Well, we're a little bit past the first week of training camp, and a lot has happened in that time, which we're going to get into much detail and discussion a little bit later. But first, I want to bring in Bob and Cayden. Guys, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Happy training camp. We're well into it. We're weekend and weekend plus. First public workout tomorrow. Doing good.
Yeah, like Bob said, doing good. Excited to be out there. The last week or so. It's been a good time. I'm excited.
That's good. And, we got to see a lot, from the veterans to the rookies that all hit the field. Some first time players that got to experience their first training camps and to see all the hoopla and the who shows up and all those other little distractions around there. So it's always a good time of the year that happens on there. But we're going to start out with just training camp as well, like the 30,000 foot view, if you will, on that. And I'll start with you, Bob, on this one. What are your initial thoughts on the start of training camp?
I'm going to go with the thing that has jumped out at me more than anything in the last couple of days. And it did, like in the last non-padded practice and then again in the padded practice, that even with Fletcher Cox's retirement, this team is still really strong on the defensive line. You watch Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis, and then you bring in Milton Williams to that mix. And that is really still a very good defensive line, and the strength of this defense. Although overall, I think this defense has a chance to be considerably better. And we're going to get to cornerback in a little bit, but I think that the improvement there is another thing that stands out. Those two things, that this defense has a chance to be a lot better, I think, is the thing that has stood out to me first in the early stages of this training camp.
Very nice. And Cayden, what do you think?
Yeah, that's a good point by Bob, just echoing, how good the defensive line has looked. Not only Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis, but I thought yesterday that Josh Sweat looked pretty good. And with Bryce Huff, if with him progressing and hopefully for the Eagles, him continuing to develop in a full-time role, this defensive line has a chance to be really good. But on the offensive end, it's still, obvious, and it's the easy pick, but it's just how good A.J. Brown and Devonte Smith are. And we've seen how productive they've been in the past. Last year, A.J. obviously breaks, an NFL record. And just the way that he was just so dominant throughout the course of last season. And with Devonte entering year 4, he only looks better than he did his first 3 seasons. Now you got a better play caller, or at least you hope so. And Kellen Moore coming in. He's got control of the offense, and he might be, more willing to move his wide receivers all around the formation and put those guys in really good situations to put up numbers. And, man, they've just looked really good. John Ross talked about it yesterday when asked about A.J. and Devonte, that, when he's talking about A.J., he said he's one of one. He can't learn from him. He said he's the closest thing since Terrell Owens, which, a couple years ago, if you said that, it might be crazy, but I don't think it's as crazy to think that he is that type of, impact player on a Hall of Fame trajectory. And then he described Devonte Smith as a smooth criminal, and the way he just gets open, the way he runs his routes. He might be the most underrated wide receiver in the league. And these guys, now under contract for the foreseeable future, have the chance to be one of the best wide receiver duos for the next 2 or 3 years. And it could be the reason that the Eagles offense returns back to elite status.
Nice. Good stuff, both of you guys. For me, I thought it's interesting, and it's making me wonder about the end of last season. It's the increased focus on conditioning with these guys, especially on everywhere you see it, especially when it comes to those linemen, the big guys. They're everywhere they're running. They're making the first team, second team, third team, all running on the field and doing the extra sprints after practices, running to every station, everything else. And the fact that the coaches are at first like they were getting on them, but now they're policing themselves into that. What makes me wonder is, especially at that last part of the season when they started really going through that historic collapse, it's making me wonder, was that something that was a contributing factor? They just not have the physical stamina that they had. I know all teams as the season progresses, are not going to be 100% like they were when they started, but makes you wonder if this is part of the new increased focus that they have during this training camp and trying to prepare themselves to make sure they're not worn down by, say, week 14, week 15, and then find themselves in a similar position. I think there's more other things to that, but I think that may have played a role in terms of that aspect of that stuff. So
it's a great point, Chris, and it's one that I don't have a point of reference on because I haven't been. This is first Nick Syria any training camp I've been through. I haven't seen. So just ask you this question: you have seen other ones. How much different is it than what he's done in the past?
Well, I think a lot of times it was a lot like the practices in terms of how they always moved around a lot in terms from station to station, but it was nothing like what we're seeing right now in terms of the guys running, in terms of the coaches getting on them, making sure they get to where they need to quickly, in terms of them actually opening up and talking about that. It wasn't in the first pads where it came on Wednesday or Tuesday, excuse me, and you look at it and you're like, okay, if they're doing all this stuff now and the extra padding and stuff like that, but the fact they're doing it before the pads came on to try to get everybody else, I wonder whether it's a lot more than what it was last year. In the last 3 years.
Landon Dickerson spoke to it yesterday some about how, and we saw, I think, the very first practice where Jordan Mailata and I think it was Cam Jurgens, that there was multiple false starts. They were not happy about it, and the linemen the lineman leaders took it upon themselves, which means there's no longer Jason Kelsey. It's the others. Hey, we're running gassers after practice. I don't care whether you were one of the guys who went false starter or not. This is unacceptable. Jordan Mailata pointed the finger at himself and said, the very first play I did it, inexcusable. And Landon Dickerson talked about it yesterday and just how it's a sign of being a player-led team, and that, in his experience, player-led teams are the best sort of teams. It's a really, really good point. It'll be interesting to see going forward how much longer they stick to that. We need to be in better shape for the long haul.
Yeah, it's crazy. And you mentioned some offensive players there, and I think, it's a good way to segue to our next question. We've seen, besides all the conditioning, we've seen some changes in this offense early on, from the motion to the way the formation, the alignment stuff, what have you. I'll start with you, Cayden, on this one. How do you think Jalen Hurts has looked so far? And do you think that his performance is sustainable? And it's not just a result of it being practice in a controlled environment, but do you think this can lead him towards a 2022 version of Jalen Hurts?
Yeah, he's looked good. It's hard to deny that through, 5 practices. And yes, of course, 4 of those have been without, full contact, and he's not really getting hit or anything like that. So time the regular season comes, maybe that'll be different, but he looks really comfortable in Kellen Moore's system. The first thing that stands out to me, and it's a simple thing, but it's also very important, is just how explosive that he's looked, just moving in the pocket to extend and, some of his throws. Just his mobility in general and some design runs. He looks as fast as he did in 2022, just from up close. And if he is able to regain some of that dual threat ability and be a guy that can pick you apart from the pocket, but also break you down with his legs like he has been able to do in the past, the Eagles offense will be really good. So that's been really encouraging. And everyone talked about it coming in to camp, and then talked about all last season, how he never looked right after, especially in the middle of the year, suffering the knee injury. And he was never up to form compared to what he has been in the past. But I think that version is definitely back. And then when it comes to just passing the ball, the ball's been really not falling on the ground too much. He's been very accurate, and I like the way it looks like he's been progressing in the offense. I thought yesterday he looked really good, especially during portions of the red zone. One throw he had in particular to Kenny Gainwell for a touchdown. He stepped up in the pocket, kept his eyes down the field, moved up when there's a little bit of pressure, and he did a good job of hitting him in the end zone for a touchdown. So overall, Jalen's looked really good, and possibly with Kellen Moore, and he could maybe reach that 2022 version. We've seen it before, right? I think a player did it once. He can do it twice. I don't think it's just by accident. Shane Steichen was a really good offensive coordinator, had success last year in his first coach with Indy as an OC as well. So if Kellen can get the best out of Jalen, which it looks like he's already starting to do, sky's the limits, because Jalen's been accurate, he's been explosive, he's been one of the best players on the field, and you paid him $250, or the Eagles paid him, not me, but the Eagles paid him $255 million, a couple years ago, to be that guy who could be a top 5, 6, 7-ish quarterback, and still think there's a world where he can become that, especially with the way he's been looking recently.
Yeah, what do you think, Bob?
I also think he's looked very good. Yesterday wasn't his best day. The last 2 days weren't his best days. He was under some pressure yesterday. A result of the two things. A result of the defensive line that I talked about early on. Several guys looked good on the defensive line yesterday. Nolan Smith was one of them too. But it was also a result of they had sort of a makeshift offensive line in there yesterday. Lane Johnson took some reps off after he had a little thing in one-on-one. He was okay, but he was in and out. And Landon Dickerson also was not in yesterday. It's been Becton at right guard. It makes you wonder a little bit, and I'm getting off track here, but if the Eagles are a little worried about their offensive line depth because they went out and signed Nick Gates yesterday to perhaps address that a little bit, that they'd like to be a little more comfortable at that position. But getting back to Jalen has looked very good this whole camp. And even yesterday, after things weren't going that great, he ended practice really, really well, with an explosive run type that Cayden was talking about, a pass for a touchdown, finding guys, being in control of the offense. It's just, I'll say this, it's so nice to be talking about how Jalen is playing and whether or not Jalen is a good leader and all that crap that we had to listen to for an entire offseason. Not that I'm upset, not that it mattered much to me. But, and I even liked watching a play where him and Saquon had a miscommunication on what would have been they were down in the red zone, down inside the 10 for sure. I don't know how close, but the play was the perfect play call. Saquon was wide open, but it appeared as if Saquon turned the wrong way. And then it was the last play. They left the field, and him and Saquon discussed it. And it was like, it was just a show of this guy. This is the guy who's in control of this offense. There are so many weapons, and I'll go back to Saquon being not just a threat running the ball, and we've been able to see that in this camp, but also just as a check down guy out of the backfield. There's some people say felt that Jalen didn't do that enough last year, that he needs to check down more and just let his playmakers make plays. There's a case of that. The thing that Jalen needs to do most, though, I think, to turn around last year is 15 interceptions, 5 lost fumbles, 9 fumbles total. That has to change. If he can cut those numbers in half, what a year he's going to have. I think you're going to see a 30 touchdown pass year, and who knows what rushing year, if he can cut down on those numbers. But I will say this, having said all that, I can't wait. The date I can't wait for is August 13th, because that's the day they scrimmage the Patriots, and that's the first time we may get a look at Jalen. I don't know, maybe not, for a quarter or for a few series against the Ravens in the first preseason game, but we're going to get an extended look at Jalen against an opponent in that practice against the Patriots, and I can't wait for that.
Now, I want to go back to something you mentioned in the middle of that. You spoke about Nick Gates and the Eagles signing him. I mean, first off, what do you think about the move? And you mentioned the bigger thing at hand. You signed Matt Hennessy, you added Becton. Is that an indictment on? And you had drafted Trevor Keegan as well too. Do you think that's an indictment on potentially a misjudgment? Do you think it's more injury related? What do you think about the signing and how it impacts his team?
I think it's a reflection on they never feel like they have enough offensive linemen, but maybe I don't know. Maybe they don't feel like maybe they don't like some of the things they've seen from some of those guys so far. They've certainly taken a major look at Becton. He's when Dickerson was out early in camp, he got the looks at left guard, and now he's been getting the looks at right guard. Whose name is blanking me? The right guard.
Tyler Steen.
Tyler Steen, thank you. I couldn't think of his name, but he's obviously in competition for that job if he's going to be the first guy you put up a right guard. So he's obviously getting lots of looks there. But I think bringing in having covered Nick Gates, fascinating story. This is a guy who started 16 games for the Giants in 2020. And then in 2021, 2 games in, had a gruesome. I covered the Giants in 2022, and everybody flinches when they talks about this injury. It was so gruesome. In 2022, broke his leg in several different places. Needed 7 surgeries to get back on the field. John Feliciano was his teammate in 2022. By the end of that season, he was split in time as the starting guard with Ben Bredesen. But John Feliciano, the center on that team, was now with the 49ers, a guard with the 49ers. We called him Psycho. He said
that's what you want from the offensive line. That's what you want from the offensive lineman.
You want an offensive lineman nicknamed Psycho. I think sometimes somewhere along. I don't know if you want them all to be that nickname, but maybe at least one of them. And I think he's a very good depth piece to add, and it's going to make some more competition here going along. But again, I'm going to go back to Jalen one last time. Can't wait to see him against the Patriots.
Cool. And Cayden, we're going to stay on the offensive side of the ball here. Cayden, I'm going to go to you with this one in terms of that. I mean, you mentioned the way that Devonte Smith and A.J. Brown have played so far during this camp, but we all know how much Kellen Moore and his Eagles offense loves to use 3 wide receivers. And that third spot, with Quez Watkins going, it's become almost a 3-horse race between Paris Campbell, Britton Covey, and John Ross. Excuse me about that one too. 3 options. Each player brings something different to the table. Who do you think has the inside edge so far for that job?
Yeah, if I'm taking an educated guess, because I don't think any guy in that mix, whether it's John Ross, Campbell, or Covey, have truly separated themselves from the pack. But right now, I would go with Campbell because he's been the guy in the league that's been the most productive, even though he hasn't really been that productive other than the 2022 season with the Colts, where he stayed healthy and he was a viable, third option, second option in that offense. But other than that, he's really struggled in his career with injuries. From 2019 to 2021, he only played in 15 games in his first 3 seasons because of a foot injury, a sports hernia, all these different types of injuries he suffered in Indy. A former second-round pick who has some talent, but don't know if he's as explosive as he used to be when he was at Ohio State. And then at the same time, he goes to the Giants after that breakout season. He talked about it, how difficult it was coming in last year with the Giants. Bob was there for a little bit, and he was going in that season thinking that he'd be one of the top options in the offense. He just had his breakout season, and then by the end of the year, Brian Daboll, benches him. He's a healthy scratch. He's inactive for the last 5 games, and he wasn't even sure if he was going to get another NFL opportunity. So it's going to be tough to rely on him because I really haven't seen anything from him that tells you or makes you kind of think hey, this guy's going to be a really good third wide receiver. But because of that experience, because of his relationship with Nick Sirianni, even though Sirianni isn't control of the offense anymore, I think he's got the slight advantage. John Ross is a true long shot. He's a great story, but he hasn't played in a football game since 2021, and he might be in the mix right now, but that says more about the depth at this position. really don't see a world where he makes the roster. He could, and that'd be a great story, but just have a hard time believing a guy who really struggled with injuries in his career as well, hasn't really found his footing, is all of a sudden going to have a late, not a late career, but like have a renaissance in his, upper 20s. And then the guy that honestly has been standing out the most, but the Eagles have always seemed to be a little bit hesitant giving the ball to, is Britton Covey. It just from watching these three guys, in my opinion, he gets open, just naturally gets open a little bit better. He's better at getting separation. I know he's small and he's not the biggest guy in the world, but I mean, your slot wide receiver, you want him to be able to separate and make some plays with the ball after the play. And I think Covey has some ability. We've seen it as a punt returner the past few seasons. And if you can get him involved, there's a chance he could develop into a solid player. And maybe he is the dark horse that we're all kind of overlooking. And then the other guys in the mix, like you would think maybe that Anaya Smith would have a shot coming into the camp, but he's really had a disappointing camp with drops. And it seems like he's struggling to adjust to the NFL, which is slightly disappointing. And then Johnny Wilson, that's that kind of that big slot, maybe could be in the mix as well, but he hasn't really stand out either.
It's funny when you look at it, it's like pretty much it felt like the two main competitions we were looking at were going to be that wide receiver spot along with that right guard spot. But all of a sudden now there's been a little surprise that at least to me, in terms of the tight end backing up Dallas Goedert, because another thing that more likes to use that 12 personnel, which is running back and two tight ends. And all of a sudden, it looks like Grant Calcaterra is to me, is a surprise number 2 now in that one. So, Cayden, when you look at Grant Calcaterra, what have you seen so far from him in training camp, and what do you think went behind this decision to get more looks? And do you think he could hold on to it?
Yeah, he's the clear favorite right now, heading into this, full second week of training camp. Clearly ahead of CJ Uzomah, who I'm not even sure is going to make the roster. Clearly ahead of just anyone in this group to be the tight end too. And just the way that Calcaterra moves has impressed me. We can think back to his college career at Oklahoma. He was an ascending NFL prospect before, having to retire because of all the concussions that he suffered. And then he came back to football a few seasons later with SMU. The Eagles took him in the 6th round, taking a risk because of those receiving skills that he did, show at Oklahoma, and that he also showed at SMU when he was playing with Tanner Mordecai. Like, he's been a guy that's always been able to get open, more of a wide receiver than the tight end. So the question always has been with him is his blocking ability. And it's been tough to see without the pads until about yesterday, but in the few glimpses I've seen, he looks like he could be a solid enough blocker to get by. And you have to be impressed with the way that he gets open. He's just a fluid guy. At his size, he can move, he can run. He's entering his 3rd year, and he was talking about yesterday how he loves playing in Kellen Moore's offense, and maybe Kellen Moore sees a world where, back in Dallas, 3 years ago, I would say, is when he had Dalton Schultz and, Blake Jarwin. He used multiple tight end sets. So, I mean, maybe he sees Grant Calcaterra as his Blake Jarwin-esque type player. And there was always some upside within, Calcaterra's, ability. It just, with his size and his speed, he had to become more well-rounded. And if he's on track to do that, the Eagles might have a quality role player here going forward. And I've been impressed. I mean, he's been through a lot, like I said, and to be able to get to the point that he's at is pretty impressive. And he was a pretty big unknown coming into this year, but if you're watching the offense this year, I'm expecting a decent dose of Grant Calcaterra.
Nice. We're going to switch to the other side of the ball now, and the Eagles apparently have a competition, their own version of the game show of who wants to be a starting cornerback. And we've seen guys filter through there, such as Isaiah Rodgers, Keely Ringo, and some others as well, too. Bob, I'm going to go to you on this one. Who do you think, as of right now, should be the starting cornerback based on their play during training camp?
Ooh, that's a great one, Chris, because I don't think they know. And it's been interesting the last few days. And I wrote about it this morning. Some was Quinyon Mitchell's they've been taking a look at him at nickel and even a little bit at dime. which I'm not sure they would have done if Cooper DeJean had come into camp healthy, but he didn't. Coming in, I think the thought was that Cooper DeJean and Devonte Maddox might battle for that nickel spot. Now maybe it's Cooper DeJean and Quinyon Mitchell might be battling for that spot when Cooper DeJean gets back, and Quinyon Mitchell would have the upper hand in that role. But I also don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that Quinyon Mitchell is the starting outside cornerback. But Keely Ringo and Isaiah Rodgers have both acquitted themselves well and gotten reps with the first team defense. Ringo lately has been getting the majority of reps with the first team defense, and it's looked good. So is Rodgers. Even, Rodgers has been running with the twos some, but even running with the twos, he's come up with plays, and it's not like he's, oh man, they got me with the twos now. I'm bummed out. He's just kept going and making plays, and we've seen him he's been doing that since the OTAs. It's a fascinating battle. It goes back to what I said at the top here. This was such a weakness for this team last year. It became even a greater one when Slay went out for 3 or 4, I think it was 4 games. Didn't come back to the postseason or last game. I forget exactly what it was, but he, with him out, it's the cornerback situation last year, and then Bradbury having probably the worst season of his career. And is now a safety in this camp who's may or may not make this team. But it was, such a weakness, such a glaring weakness at that position last year. And now it's seemingly a strength, and we haven't even seen how much of a strength it is because Cooper's been hurt. I haven't even mentioned yet that they've got guys like Eli Ricks, who ton of experience. I think Cayden tweeted this out yesterday, which was a good point, that Mario Goodrich was a guy who had a role at one point on this. He even started a game last year, and we're five practices in the camp, and the Eagles said, man, we got enough. And they released him to make room for Nick Gates. Tyler Hall's a guy, he's a slot, but who's had an impact before. Zach McPherson, there's depth there. Josh Job's another one on that. Not that any of those guys are going to compete for this starting spot, but if to get back to your original question, if I had to say how they were going to line up on opening night right now, I guess I'd go Ringo, Mitchell, and he's not going to stay there long because they didn't draft this guy number 1 overall to be a slot cornerback. Mitchell in the slot and Slay on the outside. But it's not going to be long before Quinyon Mitchell is running outside, and everybody else is going to be battling for playing time around there. But you know what? It's a problem, and a completely different problem they had a year ago, because now it's a good problem, and last year it was an eyesore of a disaster 5-alarm fire problem.
Good stuff. Cayden, what do you think? Do you think we're seeing Isaiah Rodgers or Keely Ringo or a Quinyon Mitchell start as the starter for this defense?
Yeah, it's gonna be tough to make that decision. Vic talked about it last week, how usually the coaches don't have to make the decision. Like, the player makes it obvious to him, and he hopes it's with good play, and that might be something that takes another week or two to kind of figure out, because both Ringo and Isaiah Rodgers have been playing pretty well from my perspective. I would say Isaiah Rodgers has been a little more flashy. The one thing that stood out to me is his ball skills, and he's broken up a lot of passes. And for a guy that was out an entire season because of the gambling suspension last year, how fluid he is, how active he is, just how he looks great physical shape, kind of surprises me in some way. He talked about it at training camp and also earlier in the spring about how he prepped like he was going to play every Sunday, and it looks like he's truly in contention for this starting spot. But at the same time, while Ringo to me hasn't made as many pass breakups or has been maybe necessarily as flashy just from what I've seen, he's looked very solid, and it looks like he knows what he's doing, and he's looked technical. And the Eagles took this guy in the 4th round, and they moved up all the way at the beginning of the 4th round, and they traded a future 3rd round pick to get him, which made me think in their heads that, Howie Roseman in the front office saw a world where eventually maybe Kelee Ringo could develop into a starter for them. And if he continues to play this way in camp, and I know Vic probably has a big say on who starts, but if it's very, very close the way it's looked recently, wouldn't be surprised if they lean towards Ringo, who has all the size in the world, all the speed in the world. The one question has been change of direction, and that was a problem at Georgia. One of the reasons that he ended up dropping. But it doesn't seem like it's been a problem in training camp so far, and maybe we'll learn more about that when they do face the Patriots and more padded practices that we see. But he's looked pretty good. So Ringo has a really good shot to win the outside starting cornerback spot for week 1 when they go down to Sao Paulo, Brazil. And I think that would be my guess, is that Ringo does earn that position. And Bob mentioned, Quinnen and eventually him going outside. And I do think that eventually will be the case, but with the way the NFL is changing and with 3 wide receiver sets and a lot of teams having 3 really, really good wide receivers, you look at a team like the 49ers with Ayuk and Debo and Jawan Jennings and Ricky Pearsall. You need a really good slot corner in the NFL now, and maybe Quinnen does stick in there for a year or 2 possibly, because that position's a lot more valuable than it used to be. Even writers for the All-Pro team who voted on the All-Pro team thought that by making first-team All-Pro nickel and second-team All-Pro nickel this year. You see how Kansas City used Trent McDuffie and Steve Spagnuolo's defense, and yes, he played in the slot primarily last year, and now they're moving him, it seems like they're, from what I've seen, back to the outside, but in his 1 season in the slot, he was just as impactful in the slot as he would have been on the outside. And the plays that he made in the Super Bowl with the pass breakup, he was just an elite player that made a difference on the inside, being able to cover bigger slot wide receivers and faster slot wide receivers. And Quentin Ritchell could thrive in that role. And I don't know if there's necessarily a rush to move him to the outside, especially even when Cooper DeJean returns. He's known for his versatility to play on the outside, the inside. Maybe he could play some safety. You could kind of use him as a hybrid jack of all trades type of player. So you can still find ways to get him on the field, also with Ringo, also with Mitchell, and also with Slay. And I think it's a good problem to have. Like Bob said, this team is really deep at corner. You have 5 corners, maybe even 6 with Devonte, who I still think can play a little bit, that you feel pretty good about going to next year. So if everything pans out and these players keep developing, the Eagles could have a really solid secondary going forward.
It's a great point. It's a great point about the slot too. I think one of the most underrated draft picks last year, the Lions took in the 2nd round. They took Brian Branch, the safety, and made him a slot corner. And he may be one of the most underrated defensive rookies in the league last year. He ended up, I think, 5th in the Rookie of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year voting. It's become such an important position, that slot. So it's a great point.
And I think it's a testament to the way Mitchell must have picked up this defense, because I still remember back during early on, I think it may have been Vic Fangio's first press conference with us. He said he wanted Mitchell to focus on the outside before he thought of anything else. And to drop him in, and I agree with you guys, especially with Cooper DeJean missing this time and still dealing with his hamstring injury, the fact that they're putting him in there, because playing the slot, especially to have a rookie who doesn't really have a history of playing in the slot. That's one. And if I had to go hierarchy of tough positions in the scheme, safety is number 1, probably linebacker, like off-the-ball linebacker is number 2, and that's a very close one with nickel corner, because of all the communication and recognition you have to have with the linebackers, the outside corners, the safety, everything else. You have to talk to everybody, just know which way you're doing that. And the fact that he's stuck in there already and has done a very decent job and held his own, I think is a testament to him, and the fact they can really do a lot of different stuff coverage wise. And you can disguise a lot of stuff. He has some options there. But one thing, and I'll say to watch this, and it's still very early, this team has a lot of depth. I would not be surprised if they get some calls for either Isaiah Rodgers or Ringo, whoever eventually loses out there. And maybe they potentially, I don't foresee it, but potentially they'll definitely get calls. But I could potentially see them trying to flip them for like a pick for later on, because We all know how valuable cornerback is in this spot and in this league, and the dearth of them around there, especially outside corners, just getting thin. So I wouldn't be surprised if somebody reaches out to them and tries to pry them away, or maybe somebody on the back end thing. We know guys like they're going to have to make some decisions at times, like Eli Ricks, Zach McPherson, Josh Jobe, stuff like that. They won't net like a third round or fourth round or fifth, what have you, but you'll have some options to pick up more assets later on or another player.
Think about what you just said, Chris. Could you imagine 6 months ago the idea that somebody's going to come looking to the Eagles for a cornerback to help them?
They become it's craziness. Like, the fact that we're even mentioning that, it's like, wait a minute, all right, you were hoping that one of the undrafted free agents were going to bump up and do that, but it hasn't happened. It's crazy to see that with what this team has built, and it kind of goes back to, I think of it in a way, when Fangio was the head coach of the Denver Broncos that last season. The Broncos had all these different guys that were on the roster. The Eagles reached out, they got picked up, they traded for one. In the following season, they got signed one as a free agent, try to latch on to the roster. So that he does a good job in developing these defensive backs and using them to the point they can flip them for assets. So it's a crazy and something thing to watch on there as it goes along. And if it happens, there'll be a surprise. And another surprise that happens is camp, where we see all these guys pop up out of nowhere, or we have an initial look at them, and then the summer happens, and next thing you know, something clicks. So I'll start with you, Bob, on this. When it comes to your camp standouts, your surprise camp standout, who is it for you?
My surprise camp standout, I think, would be, and I don't know how big a surprise it is, but I think he's asserting himself and living up to the potential they thought he had. I think the Kobe Dean has looked very good so far, and I'm fascinated to see how things fall at that position, because Zach Bond was, basically installed there, and I know it's OTAs and stuff with the one defense most of the time, and Nakobe was coming off the foot injuries, and he wasn't really cleared to play till the very final days of the OTAs and till the mandatory minicamp. So that certainly was a part of it. But I think Nakobe had to come out and assert himself as, hey, I'm still a guy here. I think the Eagles thought that, and I think he's done that. I think he's said, you know what, I was a pretty good player at Georgia. I'm going to show you that I'm still a good player. And again, I'm going to go to that date against the Patriots. You want to see more, but we will see a little bit more from him in the preseason too. I've been impressed with the way he's handled himself and the way he's played on the field. So I'll go with him as my guy right now.
Cool. And what, Cayden, there's always a surprise. Somebody pops up. Who do you think is the one that's been surprised camp standout?
I would go with a guy that, although I'm not expecting him to make a big impact on defense, I think he was a little forgotten when it comes to like roster projections, is Patrick Johnson, the edge rusher the Eagles took. He's entering his fourth season. In 2021, they drafted him in the 7th round, and he's been never a guy who's made a huge impact on defense and hasn't played a lot of snaps at all, but he's been one of the most important special teams players on this team for the past few seasons for Michael Clay's unit. And as a pass rusher, I mean, the last couple practices, and especially yesterday in the one-on-ones, he looks a lot more polished than he did in past seasons. He really got Darian Kennard on one rep where basically Kennard couldn't even engage with him. He was so quick that Kennard's hands didn't even get into his shoulder pads, and he just moved right past them. He won a couple other reps. I think he beat Mailata at one point as well. And I know one-on-ones aren't fair necessarily to the offensive linemen, similar to how wide receivers typically win. But at the same time, the way he's been moving, his pass rush moves, he have looked a little more polished. He looks quicker. And then in the team drills, I've noticed him making some plays as well. So if there's a guy that maybe we forgot about that as a whole that could make the roster, it could be Patrick Johnson. And maybe the Eagles feel inclined to keep 6 defensive ends if he can not only show that he's improved as a rusher, but he's also still a key special teams player for the Eagles.
Nice. And for nice by both of you. For me, it's been a shock, but I think Will Shipley has played better than I thought that he would first coming out there. I look at the way that his speed, especially after the catch, going into the flag, and also being able to consistently catch the ball. I like what I've seen so far. And we know Saquon's going to get the lion's share of the carries. We know Kenneth Gainwell is going to be RB2 because we know the coaching staff feels about him. And frankly, at times when he's on, he can be good. When he's off, we've seen what happens as well too. But when you look at when you add Shipley into that, and the amount of and the lack of use of the third running back last year, Boston Scott really touched the ball. You add him into this mix. I'm not saying he's going to be one of those. He's not going to out-touch Gainwell or anything else like that. But you can do so many put him in so many creative formations, or even have a package of plays just for him. I mean, it'll be interesting for me because I like creativity in terms of the offensive scheme and everything else. It's to the point where if it's a short yardage situation, well, not 3rd and 1 or 4th and 1 because we know tush push is coming, but say 4th and 3, 3rd and 3, what have you. Why not use 31 personnel? Put those 3 running backs in there, have the run, and maybe a couple go in motion, you reshift or whatever, and you have them all just go like, what defense? Like, what the heck is going on here? But I think Shipley has played himself into that position, especially in the passing game. So that definitely has helped out in terms of that stuff. And now we've almost basically come to the conclusion of today's show, but we have another set of practices coming up here. As we got Thursday, tomorrow, the open practice at Lincoln Financial Field, where the public will be able to get their first and only chance, see these guys out here for a practice. And then from there on, we got more continued padded practices at the NovaCare Complex. So, Cayden, I'm going to start with you on this one. What do you want to see from the team as a whole or from a specific player heading to next week?
Yeah, heading into the next week, especially with the pads on, I got my eyes on one particular player, and I'm not saying that he's been bad or good. I mean, to be honest, hasn't been super noticeable, and that's kind of to be expected early on with the pads just coming on. But I really, really want to see Bryce Huff and his get off as a pass rusher and what makes him special. We've seen the efficiency in recent years with the Jets in the breakout season in 2023 with 10 sacks, where his metrics are right up there with the Myles Garrett's of the world on a per snap basis of how effective he truly is. And I want to see him challenge, in future one-on-ones and future team drills. I want to see him challenge Mailata and Lane Johnson and give them a hard time a little bit. And I know that's difficult because they're really good offensive tackles. They're some of the best in the league. But Bryce, I want to see that area. And two, and I'm not making too much out of Vic Fangio's comments saying that he's not ready yet. I mean, that might just be a way to motivate him. I'm not 100% sure. I'm not going to say that he can't handle the run, but I want to see it happen when they go, and with more contact and things get more physical. I want to be able to see if he can set an edge and see it with my own eyes, because there's a lot of expectations with him coming in. Everyone was pretty excited about the signing, and rightfully so, because he's been productive, but they're relying on him to replace Hassan Reddick, and that's not an easy thing. Hassan Reddick has been elite and borderline elite. Elite in 2022, especially during that final 2 months of the season in the playoff run, and just the way he dominated games. The impact he had in the NFC Championship by just getting after the quarterback and knocking Purdy to the ground. Pretty much, if I remember correct, maybe I'm wrong and someone have to correct me, but pretty sure he was the player that knocked out Purdy out of that game. He was the tone setter of the defense in those final 2 months of the year. And then last year had the thumb issue at the beginning of the year, wasn't as productive, but still a guy that finished with above double-digit sacks. He's always been consistent and someone who the Eagles could rely on. It's no guarantee that Huff's as good as Reddick. I mean, Reddick's older, he's a little more experienced, and at the end of the season, you're going to need Bryce Huff to step up in big games, and you got to hope that maybe he could do something like Reddick did in 2022. So he's the guy that I really want to see step up, especially if, I still have my concerns about Josh Sweat, even though he's been productive before. I'm not sure if Josh Sweat can be a 1A pass rusher. I think he's better as a 1B, and he struggled with his production at the end of last season as well. And had injury concerns coming into the NFL. So even though he hasn't showed any signs necessarily of being hurt, it makes you wonder, how long can he truly play? I mean, could that be a reoccurring issue in the future? Maybe does he have an expiration date? I'm not 100% sure. And then two, it's just with him getting a little older, he's not going to develop until 1A pass rusher at this point. So this is Huff's pass rush group, especially with Nolan Smith not being probably ready to be that guy as well. So if he doesn't produce, this defensive line won't be as good as it could be.
Cool. What do you think, Bob?
Well, I'm going to go off script here a little bit and just say that Bryce Huff has looked better than Hassan Reddick so far, although Hassan Reddick does look very good in a kimono.
Jeez. I was not expecting that.
I think if you ask the Jets and Eagles how they feel about things right now, I think the Eagles are a lot happier with Bryce Huff than the Jets are with Hassan Reddick. But anyway, I'm still going off script. I'm going even farther off script because, as great a script as this has been, and one of your best, Chris, one of your best.
You're right.
You know how I feel about this script. As much as I like it, I'm going to use this opportunity to congratulate long time, forever Eagles announcer. Most of I don't remember anybody else, and I know you two guys don't remember anybody else other than Merrill Reese being the play-by-play broadcaster. Friday night, he's going to get the Pete Rozelle Award for radio and television. It's a prestigious award that usually just goes to guys who have been, national broadcasters. There's very few local guys. Merle's going to turn 82, and I also use this chance to promote the story I wrote about him. I wrote a very long story that's going to drop on Thursday morning. Had a lot of fun doing it. It kind of tells Merle's whole broadcasting story. And it's a fascinating story, starting with the fact that he started as the play-by-play broadcaster after the guy who before him, Charlie Swift, committed suicide. So I mean, it's just a really cool story from top to bottom. The people I talked to most were the people who've been in the broadcast booth with him were Stan Walters, Mike Quick, and the lesser known Bill Warndell, who's his spotter, Terry Small, who's his statistician, and the producer of the show, Joe McPeak, who's been with him since 1986. Told some great stories about him, and hopefully people will get a chance to read it because I really enjoyed doing the story. But most of all, I just want to congratulate Merrill Reese for winning that award, and I'll get back to what I'm looking for in training camp when training camp resumes.
No, that technically that does count because it does happen during training camp. And that is this week. So you satisfied. It was perfect. I got no qualms on that. No qualms on that. For me, it's just I want to see I want to see more physicality from this team because I think this is the time now, and you can't lay into it like you could back, say, when they were up at Lehigh or back at Widener University, any of those previous training camps for anybody who remembers either going to them or hearing about them or hear the lore about those places. But it seems like now, especially with the new NFL and NFLPA collective bargaining, you can't really do that. But there's ways you can do it. You can get around it. And Cayden, you touched upon this one as well, too, in one-on-ones. I would really love to see that. I want to see how well Jordan Davis, if he can continue to show that way, I want to see him dominate. We know Jalen Carter, what he can do. We have that one, too. I want to see Jordan Davis and where he is and pushing back a center or a guard. I want to see this defense start to form an identity early because last year they were Jekyll and Hyde, and most of the time they were Jekyll, and for me, that's not the good part because they let everybody run roughshod against them that whole entire time. So I want to see this defense really start to assert themselves in terms of they're finding their identity, being physical. And if it means I'm talking smack as well too in front of the offensive players, hey, that'll be good too, especially for us because we love to see that. And it's good to write about in terms of that. But Yeah, it's about time. Training camps are one of the best places to start to identify what you're going to be as a team, and especially for his defense. Yeah, they should do that. So we've come to an end. We're approaching the 50-minute mark. So I appreciate you guys stay through this. I really, truly, we all appreciate you guys staying with this podcast as well too. Make sure to subscribe if you like what you heard today so far, and continue to read all of our stuff on NJ.com/Eagles. So for Bob and Cayden, I'm Chris. Everybody have a good one. See ya.